This is Arun Balchandran from Go Online Training. We will be conducting certain episodes for interview questions. So we have first taken up certain basic topics from SQL Server for interview questions. Today we will be covering around 20 to 25 interview questions. Today is episode 1. And they will help you understand the logical architecture of SQL Server better. So let us look at the first question. What is SQL Server instance? So this is the question. The answer to this question we can check by going to SQL Server Management Studio. So let me share my screen wherein we go to the Management Studio. So here we have SQL Server Management Studio. You can see on top, whenever you install SQL Server Database Engine, you will see the topmost entity in SQL Server is the SQL Server instance. And given a SQL Server, you can have one instance which is having the same name as that of the system. Like here I have Brahmamayam. And you can have more than one instances of named instance. They are called named instances. This is called default instance and named instance. It is simply like saying I can have multiple engines installed in the same server. Each engine is given the name of the instance. So if they ask a question, what is SQL Server instance? SQL Server instance is that object which is an application, which is a database engine, and it can have, one server or one machine can have many instances of SQL Server. There is one default instance whose name is the same as that of the machine or the server, and others are called named instances. How many? That depends on the version. So there is a document called maximum capacity specification where you will come to know how many instances can be installed per server. So this is useful when a company is hosting data of many clients and they can choose to store one client's data in one instance, means one application instance of SQL Server. I hope everybody is clear about this. Now we go to the next question. What is the next question? What are the two layers of security while connecting to SQL Server instances? So if that is the question, the answer to that would be every instance we have to connect to. So when I use connect option, you can see there is an option of authentication. So the first level of security is authentication. And the second level of security is called authorization. So what is the difference between authentication and authorization? In authentication, it only validates whether you are a valid user who can enter SQL Server. So this is your authentication. It is like telling I want to go and meet a client in his office, and his office is in a big building. To enter the building, you require first level of security, which is authentication. So they will ask you for some ID proof like Aadhaar card, etc., just to find out whether you are a valid person, and they allow you to get into the building. But once you get into the building, you need authorization. So that is the second level that we talk about. It is under security. And authorization means you have different roles, and there are roles at server level, that is the server instance level, as well as at the database level. So you will have security even at the level of the database. So you can take any database and you will have the security here. So you can see here role is given. So every role at the database level and every role at the server level will have certain rights or privileges to access resource. Like for example, who all can access the database? So that is at the level of the server. Within the database, who all can access the tables? So what kind of access? Should they be allowed to modify the table, or they are only allowed to read the table? This is authorization, specific permissions. So to answer the question, coming back to the question, what are the two layers of security while connecting to SQL Server instances? The answer would be the first layer is authentication and the second layer is authorization. Authentication validates the user. Authorization gives specific permissions to the user both at the server level and at the level of the database. Now we come to the third question. I hope everybody is following. What are the authentication modes available in SQL Server? So like for example, when you enter a building, to check whether you're a valid person, whether you are a genuine person, they will ask either for Aadhaar card or voter ID. So you have different options available to get into the building. Similarly here, we have multiple authentication mechanisms or options. The primary ones are Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. What is Windows authentication? Suppose you are a user of Active Directory and you want to get in, then you can get in using Windows authentication. So if you are an authenticated user of Windows, you can get in to the SQL Server. This is called single sign-on. Then you have SQL Server authentication. SQL Server authentication is specific to SQL Server. So if somebody wants to authenticate from other machines which are non-Windows based machine, non-Microsoft Windows based machine, they need a username and password. So you have SQL Server authentication, and there are other mechanisms like Azure Active Directory related mechanisms are there for authenticating users who are online. So this is called as authentication mechanism. And authentication does not give specific rights or permissions. It will give some general permissions. So anybody who is authenticated will have general permissions. So you will be able to do certain things, but not everything. So specific permissions require authorization. So coming back to the question, what are the authentication modes available in SQL Server? The authentication modes available in SQL Server are first Windows authentication, then SQL Server authentication, and third would be Azure based authentication, various authentications which are Azure based. So I can either be a valid Azure user, a valid Windows server user, or I can be a user of some other server which is not running in Windows. Then I require SQL Server authentication. I hope this question is clear and the answer to this question is clear. The next question would be, what are system databases? So we have to understand that in SQL Server, when you get in, there are databases which are exclusively created for managing SQL Server. They are called system databases. Then you have other databases which are called user databases. And this is mainly for creating tables of your own and storing your own data, like Amazon stores its own data. Now we go to system databases. So there are 4 system databases that we look at. So what is the purpose of system database? Any system level information, like how many databases are created. Example. Then who are the users? Who are the logins? What are the logins? Who are the people who can log into SQL Server? All this information that you see at the level of the server is present in the system databases. Of course, there are specifics also, like master contains all the master detail, like what are the databases, other databases, then what are the files for the databases, etc. Then model DB is used for template. Template means I create a table in this model DB database. I can create my own table, And when I create my own table, it can be, let's say, for example, a log table. I need to maintain a log for every database. Then what happens is the databases that you create will also have that information. You can see that. So if you want your table to track some information for all user databases, you can put it into model. It's like a template. Then MSDB is mainly for jobs. So there are certain jobs which you can run in SQL Server. It is for the job. And TempDB is Scratchpad. Scratchpad means if you are having, let's say, you're joining two tables and you're writing a query and you need to store the information in memory, but memory is less. So you need a separate area in the hard disk where the data will be stored temporarily. And that storage area is called TempDB database. So here, these are the system databases that are available. So the question is again, what are the system databases? What are system databases? They are databases which take care of system, or you can say server instance maintenance, server instance information, different pieces of information at the server level. Question 5 would be, how many system databases are there in SQL Server and what are their functionalities? This also I have explained now as I was explaining the system databases. So there are 4 system databases in SQL Server: MasterDB, ModelDB, MSDB, and TempDB. And we have seen what is the functionality of each one of them. So that could be asked, and a little more of functions also can be asked. So you can see each one of them, like TempDB. TempDB also stores temporary tables. Suppose I have a temporary table or a temporary stored procedure. You can create some temporary tables and store it in TempDB. So whenever you stop the server, like this is how you stop the server. Whenever the server is stopped and restarted, then this TempDB gets cleared. That means it is getting created every time. So that is the reason why TempDB is used only for Scratchpad. You should not have permanent tables in TempDB. So this part has to be kept in mind. And I have already talked about MSDB, which is maintaining information about users and jobs, ModelDB acting as template, and MasterDB, which is the database containing information about all other databases. Then question number 6. I want SQL Server to create a log table every time a new user database is created. What should I do? This also we have seen. So if you want some table to be created whenever a new user database is created, you create that table in ModelDB. So I'll give you this example here. I'm going to create a new database, which is test interview. And then I say, okay. So here you can see the test interview database is created, and you can see it creates automatically the user DB info table. And this is the testing template. Both these tables are available in your ModelDB. So both these tables get created. If I create one more table, that also gets created. So that is the purpose. So you can cleanly say that it is the ModelDB database. Then question 7, what are file groups? So the answer to this would be, every database has data in it. Like for example, if I say AdventureWorks, it's a sample database. It has certain tables. So the data will be present in the table. Where is the data going to be stored? So every database will have what is called as a file group. A file group is like a folder. It's a logical store. Physically, you will never see a file group. And inside each of the file group, which is like a folder, you will have files. So you can see the files here. What are the two types of files? Basically, data files and log files. So you will have database. Database is connected to file groups. So the data from each table will go into the files which are present in individual file groups. So file groups, if they ask what are file groups, they are logical containers of files in which the data of the database is stored. That is the file group. Then question would be, what is a primary file group? and how many primary file groups can we have per database. So whenever you create a database, if you go to the file group, there will be a primary file group. So the answer to this question is you can have only one primary file group per database. And how many file groups can be created? So the primary file group will store the default file. So whenever you create any database, it will have this primary file group. Let us go back. So let us go back to this database that we created, test interview. So here, when I go to the properties, you will see the file group and there is only one file group. You can see that, which is primary. So whenever you are creating a database, it creates one file group. It's like a logical container and it contains files here. So you have one file. And one data file is there, which is called a test interview. You can see here, this is the test interview group. This should be very clear. And so the file group is a logical container which also controls whether the data inside is read-only. And it can also be default. Default means whenever you want to add any data for the database, like you want to add a table, the data will sit into the primary file group. So this is the default. By default, it is the default. Okay. So this is the primary file group and we can have only one per database. So we were coming to the question number 9. How many secondary file groups are there? Do we have in the database? So you can have any number of secondary file groups in the database. Anything apart from the primary file group is the secondary file group. Like for example, when you go here to SQL Server, this is my database called Interview Questions. I go to the properties in here and look at file group. So it is a primary file group. I can say I want to add a file group. I can name it as secondary. And I can add files to that file group. So this is what it is. So I can say test secondary file. So even the files also we will be looking at. So this is how we can create, and instead of primary you can say secondary file group. So it will create a file group and a file. So secondary file groups are there. How many such secondary file groups we can create? As many as you want. Of course, there is a limitation. If you go to maximum capacity specification, the limitation will be shown. Then you have files, of course, which we will be looking at. So if the question comes, how many secondary file groups can we have in a database? More than one. The maximum number depends on the version. It is given in the document maximum capacity specification. So there will be a document which will talk about the maximum capacity specification. Okay. Now let's move on to the next one. Can we have files in the same file groups placed in different drives? Yes. So within a file group, like for example, we have created a file group, secondary. Now the file that I created, test secondary here, which is in the secondary file group. If you look at where it is present in C drive. I can add my own file and I can say test secondary D drive. So I can say secondary file group and I can place this information, this file, instead of putting it onto my C drive, I can do it in my D drive. So in my D drive under trainings, I can go for basic SQL and then just say okay. And then I can add. So this way we can add our files inside the file group in different drives. So you can see here the first file in the secondary file group, which is called test secondary. This is in C drive. You can see here the second file is in C drive, the first file is in D drive, and both of them belong to the secondary file group. If you see, Both of them belong to the secondary file group. So to answer the question, can we have files in the same file group placed in different drives? Answer is yes, you can. And the advantage of this is there are two ways of looking at it. You can have two different file groups and have files inside one file group in one drive. Advantage is if one drive gets full, the other drive can be utilized. But as a good practice, usually we will have multiple drives fixed or multiple files of different drives in one file group, so that if a table data is being stored, if one drive is full, the table data further when it has to get stored will go to the other drive. And usually they will follow what is called as proportional fill strategy. The files will follow that. If you have a file of 1 MB or 1 byte and you have another file of 2 bytes and you have 3 bytes, then 2 byte data goes to the 2 MB file and 1 byte data goes to the 1 MB file. This is called proportional fill strategy. So this is the answer to the 10th question. We can have files in the same file groups placed in different drives. Now we come to question number 11. Can we have one table data stored across two file groups? Answer to this is no. If you create a partition, you can do it. But without a partition, you cannot have one table data stored across two file groups. Now, how is it possible if you use a partition? Then it is quite different. Then the data of the table is partitioned and every partition data can be stored in a different file group. So there we can have, but otherwise if there is no partitioning of the table, horizontal partitioning of the table, one table can only be mapped to one file group. This is the answer. Okay. So I hope people are following the questions. Questions are pretty easy. And those who want to actually go ahead and learn more about SQL Server before getting into and giving a job interview, you can see the option available, Go Online Training. So you can go ahead and inquire for the trainings that are going on in Basic SQL Server and Advanced SQL Server, both the batches. So let's go to the 12th question. Can we auto grow a data file? Answer is yes. So your data file is a file which contains data. So first question would be, what are the different types of files that we have? In any database, we are having two types of files, the data file and the log file. And when you look at the data file, we are looking at auto grow option. So you go to the data file, you have something called initial size. So every file will have some initial size, and then you can have an auto grow option. Either you can allow the file to grow in say 100 MB size. So when it becomes 100 MB, the next 100 MB is allocated. Or here maximum file. That means you can have maximum of 100 MB or some limited file size is there. Or you can have unlimited file size and you can keep growing. That means if I say grow by 64 megabytes, that means every 64 megabyte, a new 64 megabyte is allocated in the file. Therefore, the file that you see here, which is a database file, is called as a sparse file. It can expand automatically. So initially it is 8 MB and then it can grow automatically with the options. So what are the options available? We have seen auto grow options available, but still once again I will show. The options available are, when you want a file to grow, the first option is unlimited growth. Second option is limited growth. When you go for unlimited growth, you can specify, or even limited growth, you can specify by how much you want the file to grow. You can say either in percentage or in megabytes. So because the file is sparse file. So that is the answer to the question. Options available are unlimited growth, restricted growth, and growth can be in specific megabytes or it can be in percentage of the file, current file size. What are the different types of files we have in SQL Server? This question is answered previously. We have data files and log files. What is the purpose of data file? What is the purpose of log file? The purpose of data file is to store the user data, like you have created a table and you want to store. What is the purpose of log file? To give you an example, when you write something in Word document and you want to undo, okay, or redo, you need to log what is the change that has been made to the document somewhere. Similarly, in database, changes keep happening. New inserts, new rows get inserted, new rows get deleted, new rows get updated. The changes that are happening in the database have to be logged somewhere, and that is why it is called as a log file. So can we have more than one log file? Answer is yes, we can have more than one log file. So what are the two different types of files that we have in SQL Server? Data file and log file. Okay. Then what are the benefits of a file group? People can ask, or question can be asked. The major benefit of the file group is if two tables belong to two different file groups, SQL Server uses multi-threading to access the data. So if I write a query where join is done and the two tables are in two different file groups, I can use multi-threading feature of SQL Server and simultaneously access the data from the two tables. Similarly, a table can have an index. I would like to simultaneously access the index and the table data. So both of them can be kept in different file groups. This is the benefit. The next benefit is you can also have file group which will limit the disk drive where you store data. You can choose file group 1 will have all C drive files. File group 2 will have all D drive. So therefore you can specify which file groups data go in which drive. Then what are the two types of data files in SQL Server? So the two types of data files in SQL Server is called the primary data file, which will be present in the primary file group only. So remember that we have this primary file group, and this primary file group has one file. So by default, whichever file gets created when you create the database is called the primary file. In this case, it is test interview. Any other file you create is called secondary data file. So there is primary data file and secondary data file. What does primary data file contain? It contains metadata and it also contains data by default unless you specify a secondary file group where you push the data. Otherwise, primary file group will contain both metadata and data. Good practice is you push the user data to the secondary file group and make the primary file group only for metadata availability. What is the purpose of log file? We have seen it is to log information about the changes that happen to the database, like insert, update and delete these changes, and also certain DDL changes like altering a table schema, dropping a table, etc. Then comes the next question. What is the next question? Are system databases common to all instances of SQL Server? No. Every instance of SQL Server has these four different system databases. What are the different types of SQL Server instances? We have covered this question. I answered it. You can have default instance and named instances. These are the two different types of instances of SQL Server. Default means that engine instance will have the same name as the system. And named means you will have a specific name. Okay, question 19. Where is the information about user databases stored in SQL Server? So the information about user databases stored in SQL Server in MasterDB, which is a system database. What will happen if the master database is unavailable? This question can come. If master database is unavailable, I will not be able to run SQL Server engine because the SQL Server engine instance I'm telling will depend on the master database to even run. So this instance which you see which is running, this instance will not run if there is no master DB. Then if the query must store large data, and primary memory is insufficient, means your main memory, your RAM. Which system database does it use to store the query output temporarily? We have already seen it uses the tempdb database. So this has to be kept in mind. Which data file stored the tables in a database? System tables. So you have two types of data files. What are those? Primary data file, which is having an extension called MDF, and secondary data file, which is having the extension of LDF. The primary data file stores the system tables in the database, the data in the system table. What is the purpose of a partition? We are not covering in detail because this is a basic. So they may ask you what is the purpose of partition, and we know the purpose of partition is the same table data you want to split and store it in different places. Like I may have sales data for different years. I can store one year's sales data in one set of files, another year's sales data in another set of files. So you'll have one table and you want multiple partitions, which are called horizontal partitions. And we use this for distributing the data across different files and file groups. Name some database objects in SQL Server. So what are the database objects? Whatever you have under the database is called database objects. So like for example, tables, it's a database object. Views is a database object. Then under programmability, you see stored procedure is a database object. Function is a database object. So these are all the database objects that we look at. So if you name some, you can go through and you can name some of them in SQL Server. Let's go to the last question. Actually, this is a question that is important for people who really don't know SQL Server at all. What is SQL Server Management Studio? The tool that you are seeing here is called the SQL Server Management Studio. It is used by a developer or an administrator to connect to one SQL Server engine. So this is called SQL Server Management Studio. It's called SSMS otherwise. Now, not all will use this client tool to connect. Some may also use certain applications. You can also use Excel to connect to SQL. So there are many client tools that you can use, but this one is specifically used so that you can do maintenance of SQL Server. At the same time, you can do development of queries, etc. using SQL Server. So this is the last question that we have. I hope you enjoyed this episode of SQL Quiz. As I said, this topic that we have covered is SQL Server Logical Architecture. Likewise, there will be other episodes which will cover questions on other topics. Welcome again. Thank you. Keep looking for the other episode which will be coming on to the Go Online YouTube channel, and do subscribe to the channel. Also, if you want to join SQL Server Basic to understand more about SQL Server, because data is important and SQL Server is a database engine, do contact Go Online program or Go Online training and find out the programs that are going on or the future programs. So this SQL Server Basic and Advanced program, along with Power BI, Azure, etc., they are all having a fixed timetable. So if you go through, you will come to know when the next course or the next batch is starting. Thank you. See you until the next episode. Take care.